Hello and welcome to Success is Never Accidental. I'm Lynn Payton and I'm passionate about helping individuals and organisations to get better outcomes and to feel more fulfilled. And it's my belief that the success in any agency is strong leadership. And in this podcast, I get to interview some highly successful leaders across all sectors and internationally so that you can get a better sense of their formula for success and identify some of the common factors. But nothing changes without action. So every episode includes a challenge to you to reflect, to evaluate, to decide, and to act. In other words, to do something differently going forward. My guest today, Professor Robbie Gilligan, is a leading international authority in the field of child welfare and social work. Based at Trinity College Dublin, where he served as Professor of Social Work and Social Policy for 20 years, Robbie's work has shaped thinking and practice on resilience, care, and the life chances of children and young people who find themselves in out-of-home care, not just in Ireland, but around the world. Robbie's research has informed policy across Europe, North America, Australia, and beyond, and he's regularly invited to speak and collaborate internationally. In addition to his own academic work, Robbie serves on the editorial boards of several leading journals in the fields of social work and child welfare, reflecting the global regard for his scholarship and influence. For decades, Robbie has championed stability, education, and supportive relationships for children in care, and he's published hundreds of papers, and he continues to bridge the gap between research, policy, and practice to improve real-world outcomes for young people. Robbie, it's so good to see you today. How are you?
Great. Just back from holiday, so all the better for that. Tuning back into real world life.
Fabulous, fabulous. So you and I go back a very long way. Our paths have crossed and then went different ways and crossed again. But start at the beginning, Robbie. Why did you even go into social work in the first place? Because it was a very young profession in Ireland.
Yes, and I think when I told some of my relatives, they thought I was, that it wasn't a very wise choice. But my parents actually were quite supportive. I was an only child, and I suppose I was influenced by my parents. They were, in a gentle sense, they were kind of interested in, they were compassionate towards people who were unlucky. They believed in helping build a better world, and they weren't doing necessarily anything terribly dramatic about that, but they did pass on those ideas. And I went to a school which I've been reflecting on recently about the influence it had. I was privileged to go to a private Jesuit school, Belvedere College, which is one of the better schools in Dublin, boys' school. And that was run by the Jesuits, who are. I was thinking recently, why am I interested in international things? And I actually think there were two things I got from the school besides learning Latin, which I loved and therefore helped me in learning languages and all that. But um, they they had a very international outlook, and one of the most formative experiences was a month-long school tour with a group of about 20 boys and two priests all around Europe. It was amazing, and actually that really, I think, sowed the seeds of why it was valuable to learn about what's happening in other places. And then one day my Latin the priest teaching Latin came into the class and said he was the chaplain in a local youth club that was run by past students in a very deprived neighborhood in the city, and had been there for maybe 75 years or 70 years. It was a long time on the go. And they said, anyone who's interested in coming down to be a volunteer in the club, because we used to recruit while people were still at school, and then they would stay on after they were in school for a few years, particularly in university. And I took that up, a few of us did, and it was a very formative experience of my life. I went on to go to summer camps, and I began to question, why are these kids so deprived? What is it about our city and our society that leads them to this situation, and so on? And I kind of decided. I can remember sitting in a quiet moment on one of the camps, the holiday camps, and great fun, but tiring as well. uh, and asking, thinking to myself, this is what I want to do with my life. Actually, this is what I want to do. So, in a sense, that invitation by the priest to go to the club was a big influence, and then the school trip, I think. So even though they might have put a lot of energy into teaching me French verbs or equations or whatever, it was those two things. An important lesson, I think, that it's the atmosphere, the climate in the family and in the school that was in many ways more influential than the actual content of what was being said or taught, particularly in relation to school. So I went, yeah, sorry, go on. Yeah.
I was just going to say, it's really that values base, isn't it, that we grow up with, that sense of making a contribution and understanding difference in society, and then seeing, well, is there something that we can do to help, when it's at its most basic.
Yeah.
So what happened next?
Well, I think one of another big influence, and I was thinking about what are the important lessons from looking back, and I think one of the things is the importance of thinking relationally. That the people who had an influence on me were people with whom I had, who I admired, who gave me attention, or not that I was needy, but like I was coming in as a 17-year-old or whatever, green, wet behind the ears, and there was guys who were who seemed much more mature at 21 or 24 or whatever, and they were, the whole ethos of the place, of the club, was that you encouraged younger people to be interested and so on, and everything was really based on group relations and individual one-to-one rapport and so on, both with the adults, the helpers, and with the kids, and with the older boys, who were often the intermediaries between the younger kids and the adults, who, don't forget, were from a different social background. But all of that, I think, you learned that that you had to kind of, you couldn't make decisions and enforce them without the buy-in of everyone else to some extent. So in many ways, your own development, but also the development of whatever project you were talking about, had to be based in some kind of relational mandate or consensus or respect, and that was probably a very profound learning, I think. And it gave me a framework, both the values, but also this emphasis on relationality and some sort of mandate that you can't just ignore the context. You have to understand the context, and you have to respect the people in the context, and negotiate and navigate your way through on that.
And you have to get engagement, and you have to get buy-in. And the only way we're going to get that is if we listen. Because I think what goes wrong so many times is people assume they understand somebody else's model of the world, rather than being interested and asking questions that help us to better understand that, which is really what you've done your whole life, Robbie, because you didn't stay long in practice. You really chose the academic and research route quite early. Why was that? Was that just your curiosity?
Um, I think that, yeah, it isn't. I mean, it's still probably need to give more thought to why exactly, but I think it was something to do with the bigger picture, that I was aware that you could do useful things for individual children or families or groups of kids that you worked with in a project or in a program in the youth club, but ultimately you weren't going to change housing policy or health policy. Or, I mean, this is when I was naive and ambitious and thought, okay, I can make a big difference. I'm now happy to make little differences.
After all these years, I would say you've made a big difference, but we'll come on to that. Carry on.
So I thought that, if you were going to influence policy or influence the future of different services, if you could influence the thinking of the people who were going to provide those services, and if you could influence the thinking of the people who were going to fund and guide those services in policy terms, that was probably, you're going to have a bigger, maybe a somewhat bigger impact. I mean, the older you get, the more you realize how multifactorial the issues are in terms of influencing progress, and also that you have to have, I think, a long-term view, that some of the bigger influences take longer to really take effect. But I can see that you can contribute to shifts in thinking that over time, like, for example, the importance of publications and research. The universities in the Republic of Ireland, as like many other places in the the from the in the late 20th century, so that publication became such an important issue, and that was good for the field, even though it was a struggle for people to adjust to that, to make the transition. Those academics in place at the time, maybe there was more of an emphasis on teaching. And teaching is still very important, but so also is the creation of knowledge
And
and
we can't
dissemination
influence
of knowledge.
and we can't influence policy without evidence, Robbie. And that's where research is so critical. So what encouraged you to choose the research subjects that you have focused on over the years?
I think it's realizing that you can't do everything, that you have to have a focus. You had to have a focus in your teaching, and therefore it made sense to have a similar or related focus, or a focus within your teaching area. Uh, and so I came into social work through the youth work angle, through trying to influence outcomes for young people, children and adolescents. And obviously then you had to be interested in their families as well and their communities. That was an important lesson through the youth work, that all of these things connected up.
And
So I was
one of the things I learned managing services in Belfast during the Troubles was that communities were the key to getting anything done. And if you hadn't got trusted relationships, if they didn't trust you, and if you didn't have people within those relationships who are within those communities who were your go-to people, really nothing could happen.
Yeah, totally. Um, And so one of the kind of my favorite words is context. That I spent a lot of my time in teaching and research trying to help illuminate the context of and understand the context and understand the logic of the different actors, and indeed identify the different actors who are influencing. So in other words, if you had a child who's in foster care, who were the actors who had some influence on their world and their logic and their thinking? And it wasn't just the carers. It might have been the other foster children in the home, the birth children of the foster family, maybe the grandparents of the foster family, maybe the school teachers, maybe their own birth parents, their birth siblings living somewhere else, and why were some of them still at home and they were in foster care, and so on. All of these were part of the story, and you couldn't really understand properly what was going on without having that awareness. And similarly, if you're looking at an issue like attendance rates in a local primary school in an inner city area, you need to have a strong sense of the context in order to really get to grips with what's going on. So context, context, context. And then as I went on, the kind of importance of obviously being aware of what is the research evidence, the wider evidence internationally. So you are working in a city in Dublin, and obviously the local experience, local evidence is very important, and try and have a systematic grasp of that. But you also need to know, well, okay, well, what's happening in Birmingham, or what's happening in Berlin or in Boston or Beijing? Can we learn something from what's happening there? And can we bring that back? Not that we borrow it in totality and just parachute it into the local context, but how can we adapt insights from other places? How can we see whether those are relevant, and can we adapt them and fit them in? Can they improve our thinking and broaden our thinking? And I found in general it was very enriching, like the school tour. I saw the world in a new way when I discovered my first gelati or my first pizza or whatever. I mean, it was just mind blowing. It was so, at so many levels, to be exposed to different languages and different cuisines, and also the wisdom of the priests who were kind of able sort of manage all these boys, but with a light touch, and not letting us off the leash, but equally giving us a bit of freedom, which was, also negotiating that with our parents, that they had got they really had they were very experienced in running these things and giving people a bit of freedom. And that's important as well. I think that one of the tricks in managing situations, I think, is respecting people's autonomy and listening to them and giving them a space in which to operate. And that's a challenge, I think, in all kinds of management, isn't it? The amount of control versus the amount of autonomy.
Absolutely, because one of the things that I find all the time is an incredible amount of micromanagement, especially in the public sector, because it's become so risk averse now. And we're dealing with people, people are complex, families are complex. The context, as you say, is so complex, but we have to see parents as the kind of experts in their own environment. And I love that BASWA has more recently really talked about experts by experience and working more and more with people who have lived experience of disability, of being in care. And it's bringing a richness to the work now, which is fabulous. Robbie, you've published an enormous number of articles. I was just blown away whenever I was looking at some of them last night. But tell us, how do you approach writing and how do you maintain that level of output? Because lots of people start, but they don't necessarily
I
get
know,
to the
yeah.
end point. You've just got so many articles over the line and chapters and books and different publications. What's your approach? How do you start?
Um, well, I suppose one of the things to acknowledge is that it took me a while to get to grips with how to do it. So it's not as though I started day one and had everything worked out day one. I've kind of learned over time things that have helped me. I think one of the things is being not trying to do too much in any single project. So one of the things I think that's quite crippling is people trying to cover an awful lot of ground. I think if you can decide what is the one message you're trying to deliver with a specific writing project. Now, it's a capital M message, obviously, but having clarity about what is it you're trying to say that's different. What are you adding?
Yes, yes.
So what are you adding? Now, adding isn't necessarily saying something is completely original and unthought of before, but maybe you're helping people understand it in a new way. So maybe you're saying, look, we need to think about this in a slightly different way, and here is the way I'm suggesting. Um, so I think being clear what it is you're trying to say, having passion, I think is important. That you feel committed to the issue, that you are drawing on other evidence and other work, that you're able to say where my piece fits into this other work. That you're not just sort of implying that there's nothing else going on out there. I find it has been very productive over the years to work with other people. I also like writing by myself sometimes, but I think it has been it has been very good for my output, I think, to collaborate with people, and to do so, learning how to do that with international colleagues has been very enriching.
Mm.
Um, and that, I think, adds a lot of value to whatever you're doing, because you're bringing immediately you're bringing different perspectives the work process. Um, I also, besides the international piece, I would say I've gained a lot from working with it across disciplines. So some of the work I've done has been with people in areas like education or psychology. I mean, you know that at one stage I was involved in the development of the Children's Research Centre in Trinity, which was quite, has been the foundation of a lot of other things that have followed on from it. But that was a collaboration with a colleague in this department, then Department of Psychology. And we were very committed to interdisciplinarity in that, and we our aim was to bring people from other disciplines as well. And that worked up to a point. It obviously depended on there being people with the similar relevant interests.
Mhm.
And that sort of trajectory of interdisciplinary interest in children is still very strong in Trinity. There is an inter, you know a coalition of researchers in the area of children's research now there, which
And I was at the event where then, because you partnered or you supported Queen's in getting their children's, they didn't call it the Children's Race, but Childcare Research Centre or something at Queen's University in Belfast was launched around the same time, and you fostered a lot of cross-border collaboration at that
yes,
time.
yes, and one of the most enjoyable and projects or sources of pride in my career was being very involved at one point in the North-South Child Welfare Conference, which was again this idea of integrating people from different perspectives, North-South, which was not that common at the time. This is back in 1988 or maybe a bit earlier, getting people from all different service systems in children in care and in the community to meet for intensive 2-day discussions and presentations and debates about the future direction of services, with a strong dollop of socializing as well, which was very uplifting for everyone.
I remember it well, but it was hugely important in terms of being much more strategic, having a much more open kind of dialogue. And it helped enormously to mitigate some of the tensions that were so relevant and so apparent, and we were all working through at that time, Robbie. I don't know if it was that event or another event, but you said something that stuck with me my whole career, because you said, and this is back to the multidisciplinary bit, and when we were trying to say it doesn't matter who you are, safeguarding was the big topic. We talked, and you talked about it doesn't matter whether you're the teacher or the football coach or the social worker or the priest. And you said, it doesn't matter what your role is, but you might be the only light in a child's life. So you have to treat every child as if you were. And I tried to practice that my entire career. And I think it doesn't just work for children, it works for every person you meet. So when I'm doing leadership work, I'm thinking that thing, am I leaving this person better than I find them? Am I always, will they always think that they learned something and that they got something of value? So I just want to honor you and thank you for that, because that was very much the ethos that you promoted.
Thank you very much for that. And yes, I think that's an important. In one way, it's a chastening a message as well, because you have to be sensitive to what you're saying and all the contexts in which you're saying things. But I remember one of the lessons I learned, and it took me a while in teaching, is you may be speaking to 30 people with one voice, and you think that voice is what carries in the room. But what's carrying in the room is the 30 receivers in the in the minds of the people. Each person is hearing you differently according to what's in their mind. So one is a lone mother who's worrying about her kids at home, whether they've got something to eat or whether should she be home to cook them their dinner, or feeling guilty. And somebody else is worried about they've just broken up with their boyfriend, and somebody else is worried they just heard their mother is not well, or the dog has died or whatever. And that is the reality in every context. Each person there's a filter in there that's affecting their reception of what's being said, the filter based in their daily life and their daily experience. And we have to be respectful of that and sensitive to that, and be aware that therefore sometimes you have to keep saying certain things and also say them in a way that lightens the message to some extent. I always found humor was very important, that people remembered sometimes the fun. It was both like a bit like what I was saying about the atmosphere in the school. It wasn't just the content of what you were being taught, but the value framework or the kind of the general feeling in the school. And I always tried in my classes as much as possible to introduce a certain amount of lightness, fun. Fun is, I think, one of the problems about all our sort of, systems in large organizations, public or private, is that fun goes out the window a bit. And fun is actually inevitably relational. It's very hard to sort of laugh privately. It is a collective experience. And I think that is important to lighten, sometimes find ways of helping people remember. And storytelling, I think, is extremely important. People remember stories. I'm really struck by that, by the number of people who come up to me in different, you meet people many years later and they say, you taught me or you spoke. I remember you saying, like you said to me there, you remembered something I'd said. And very often people are remembering they remember the message because of the story that delivered the message. And I
It's
think and a story gives people some kind of framework to guide them. They can hold on to the story, and it kind of guides them in different contexts under different pressures. If you can kind of help people when they remember what they should do when they knock on the door and the dog is barking and they're feeling a bit unsure of themselves on their own at the door, or going what's going to be behind the door as they do a home visit, and they need some kind of anchor in their head as to, okay, well, what I'm trying to do here is, build rapport, build trust, whatever, but using, so humor often is a way of, and the story are ways of helping them hold on to something that's beyond just the kind of the handbook and you
yeah.
know the policy state.
Connecting. That's a nice dog. What's the dog's name? So
And he'd be an even nicer dog when he's taking his teeth out of my leg. Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. Well, that's the fun bit. But rapport is about connecting with people where they're at. And, it needs to be practiced. For some people, it's intuitive, but for others, it needs to be
Yeah.
practiced. Robbie, this has been a fascinating conversation. Tell me, what do you see as your legacy for your research? Your
Well, I think I have contributed to building capacity for individual people who I've worked with. Not for everyone, I couldn't claim that, but I hope that that among the people I've worked with as a colleague or as a student, that more of them have felt able to do more things as a result of my support or encouragement. I think probably the most important thing you can offer as a mentor or a guide is encouragement. And encouragement, I think, also has to involve support, but also maybe a little bit of challenge. Because sometimes people are saying, oh, well, I couldn't. Actually, sometimes the thing that's holding people back is themselves and their own fear of failure. And I think, sometimes it's about helping people see a way. I think helping people see step by step the way forward. So my legacy, I hope, is that I've supervised 14 PhDs to completion. So I think that is an important contribution. But I mean, obviously, it's a lot more than that. And the people who've done their PhDs, hopefully, most of them go on to, multiply. They go forth and multiply in academic terms, and that they, in turn, do take on that process of supervision and support, and run research projects. But also people, going out into visiting students on placement as social work placements and encouraging them to get the most out of those and making good decisions that match their interests in their career. Had many conversations with people about what next steps they should take or think about. Um, And I hope a legacy is that to be more that for many of the people who I've had contact with, that they're a little bit more internationally minded than they might have been, a bit more interdisciplinarily minded than they might have been, a little bit more sensitive to the needs of the client and the service user. I put a lot of emphasis in my later years in terms of trying to encourage students in the early placements to have exposure to the service user perspective. So going into, not just going in at the level of the traditional placement was you went to the professional social worker and sat in their office and followed them in different senses and learned from them. But what we were trying to do was get people to get out into community projects where they were actually sitting alongside service users and listening to their stories first before they listened to the social worker stories. And actually, I think a lot of them got like either going into schools or into community centres and listening and seeing the world from the vantage point of the people they were going to be working with in the future. But they might not otherwise have had exposure to that perspective other than across a courtroom or across a meeting in a hospital or whatever. Do you know what I mean? But I think I think one of the challenges is how do we kind of cultivate more compassion? We obviously must be rigorous, we must be efficient, we must be effective, productive, and so on. But also, I think we do need the things we remember most are kindness and compassion. So,
Absolutely. And I think those who are able to deliver hard messages, take hard decisions, but to do it with kindness and compassion, and always for the families involved to feel that whoever's working with them is doing their best for them and their children. And sometimes that balancing act can be very, very difficult. Robbie, you have just added so much value to the profession, to the academic world. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us today. And thank you so much for sharing so much of your wisdom.
you're very kind. Thank you very much, Lynn, for giving me the opportunity and for the invitation.
I really enjoyed that conversation. Robbie Gilligan is one of the legends in social work research in Ireland. And although most of his conversation was about research and teaching social workers and other professions working with children, the lessons are applicable across sectors and industries. So here's just some of them. Focus on the bigger picture. How can your research, your team, your organisation have a bigger impact? When working on a project, get clarity about the outcome, the key message, and the value that you are adding. We can't do everything. So to be successful, we need to decide where our focus should go and then implement. Robbie said relationships are absolutely key to progress in any endeavour. And working internationally is enriching because it brings different perspectives, different models, and different insights. Robbie Gilligan's legacy is that he has helped so many students and colleagues build capacity by supporting, encouraging, and challenging them appropriately. And he places huge value on cultivating compassion and kindness. So, my challenge for you is this: decide what's the one thing you need to prioritize and truly focus on this week and why. And then do something about it. Remember, success is never accidental. The more intentional we are, the better the results.